right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for jumping on. INOGENI BTX. That is the end of my introduction. Mr. Mehalso, how are we doing today?
We're doing great. How are you doing, Jordan?
Fantastic.
I'm going to jump right in. A really good place to start is with the INOGENI Share 2U. Share 2U is what we consider their flagship product because it gives you a lot of stuff packed into one package. The beauty of this is it treats everything like a video switcher. USB inputs, HDMI inputs, and has some really interesting output capabilities too. So if you have any two USB devices and one HDMI device, those can all be accommodated by the switching engine. And on output, you're getting not just a local HDMI output, but you're also getting a USB capture output. So you can both run to your conference and streaming PC and to the local monitor in the room. The buttons are really price of admission because you've got two buttons for your two channels. The one, number one is dedicated to USB 1. Button number 2 is either toggling between USB 2 or HDMI. Those are both going to be full screen options. Then you've got a picture-in-picture feature. And if you press that button repeatedly, it'll move your PIP to the four corners of the screen until you've got it where you want it. There's a side-by-side split screen, and if you press that button again, it goes to top and bottom split screen. You've also got a big and small view. I call that a 70-30 view. And as you can see to the right of that, there's a little button with two arrows on it. That's your flip button. So when you press that, it's going to either switch the big one and the small one, the top one and the bottom one, the left one and the right one, or take your PIP and go with the small one and the big one and reverse those. Pretty handy if you're trying to change focus midway and, sometimes looking down and grabbing one of those switches is perfect. So that, like I said, is a big part of the Share 2U, the big, squishy, responsive buttons. You can actually play this thing like an instrument almost. If you get good at it, you don't even really have to look at it, which is awesome because you want to stay engaged with your content and engaged with your audience. So after a while, you're just going to be hitting those buttons like a pianist, and it'll be very natural to you. Also, those buttons illuminate. So with a little glance, you can see exactly what status your Share 2U is in, and that makes it really easy to navigate too. Just an extra cool little feature they throw in. There are tons of applications where we see the Share 2U. Education is certainly one of the big ones. So looking at like K through 12 classrooms for teacher stations, that's a fairly obvious one. University lecture halls with those podium systems, collaboration spaces, and don't forget practical spaces. If you're talking about maybe you've got a document camera in an art studio, that's a perfect application for a Share 2U. Maybe you're looking at specimens in a biology lab with a camera. These are all perfect environments for Share 2U. Corporate is a funny one because during the pandemic, a lot of people who were, for the first time doing lots and lots of conferencing were saying to themselves, well, hey, I've got two webcams. Maybe I should just plug them both in, and Zoom and Teams are going to magically know what to do. Well, they don't. You got to pick one, and there's none of these really neat features built into Teams and Zoom yet, at least. So there was a lot of frustration, and Share 2U came along at the perfect moment to address that. So, of course, conference rooms, perfect example. Training rooms, live stream studios. I mean, 3 years ago, no one even had these, but now in enterprise, this is fairly common to have a dedicated space for live stream. Huddle spaces, of course. And don't forget the portable aspect of Share 2U. If you're a sales rep or doing presentations in the field, why not take all that power with you? I mean, it's only this big. You can throw it in a laptop bag. It's ruggedized. The construction is pretty tough, so you're not going to hurt it just because it's bouncing around in a laptop bag. So by all means, bring it with you. So this is the back plane of the Share 2U, where you can see your two USB inputs and your HDMI input. You've got a local HDMI output, and you've got your stream output or capture output up at the top there on the front of the unit. You can control this with RS-232 or IP commands. You've even got an analog audio I/O, which is great if you're running audio out to a speaker system or capturing it from a tap off a mixer or something. There's even a really neat mixer feature in the Share 2U software that comes with it. So you can mix all those different things together or pick one audio input and omit all the others, which is a pretty common application for that. You've even got a couple of USB service ports or expansion ports So if you just want to plug in whatever, a mouse, a keyboard, anything that you want to get on that USB bus, you can plug it right into the Share 2U, presuming it's going into the USB bus anyway. The Cam 300 is in the same family, but it takes some features away and adds some features on. So if you're just looking to do more on the input side, that's what Cam 300 is for. You're going to get 4 discrete inputs this time, so there's no toggling with this one. 2 are USB and 2 are HDMI. So again, if you had a couple of webcams, laptops, you're just going to get more inputs, 4 total. And then on output, you get the same capture and local monitor output. By the way, Cam 300 is officially certified for QSYS products. So if you have a capture-enabled QSYS product, you can plug the Cam 300 right in and it'll work beautifully. So there's an application diagram. Just like I said, maybe a couple USB cameras, an HDMI camera, and an HDMI laptop. Those are all going to go in and come up on their own button, but you still got the same options on output. And of course, you can still control this with IP or RS-232 if you don't want to use the buttons. So again, applications, I mean, courtroom is a good one for this because typically you'll have a plaintiff camera and laptop with HDMI and a defendant camera and laptop with an HDMI. That is exactly what the Cam 300 has for input. But on output, these things are going to have to be recorded, archived, streamed, conferenced. So you're going to have to hit a PC. And of course, you'll have a local monitor or monitors in that room, maybe a projector, whatever. There's going to be attendees and there's going to be a jury. So people are going to have to see that stuff. Absolutely perfect. That's what Cam 300 does. We've also seen this a lot on medical carts. Anytime you're doing these mobile systems in hospitals, they've usually got lots of different devices in there that all have output, but they've got a local monitor and there's a PC in there somewhere, which again, boom, perfect for the Cam 300. It's a small form factor. It does everything in one box and it accommodates all those inputs and outputs. So staying with the same switcher family, we'll now talk about the Cam 230, which is the newest member of this product category. So again, it's going to still give you that same output format, but on input, this time you're getting dedicated channels for 2 USB and 1 HDMI. But you're going to notice it looks different. The form factor is different, and there's something missing. The buttons. We found a lot of people were buying the Share 2U, but sticking it in a rack, never touching the buttons. And in those applications, typically they had some audio mechanism elsewhere in the system and didn't need the audio I/O either. So that's exactly what this is addressing. Why spend the money on those features if you don't need them? Get something that's a little bit more appropriate to the form factor. And there you go. You've got the switching engine still, 2 USBs and an HDMI, capture output, local output, control it the same way. But obviously, you don't have the top-mounted buttons. Instead, we give you these tiny little front-mounted buttons. Well, you're probably only going to touch them once. You're probably only going to really use these when you're setting it up or installing it initially. So they didn't need to be big. Why pay for big ones, right? But as you can see, the form factor is suited to putting it in a rack. So 1.75 inches high. This thing even runs over PoE, which is super nice because, hey, if there's one thing none of us need, it's more wall warts in our rack or anywhere else. So usually there's PoE floating around that rack somewhere. Plug and go. Cam 230 was designed for that application. No problem. Let's switch gears. We've talked about the switching family. Let's get into some of the converters instead. We'll talk about first the 4KX Plus. This is a little bit nichey, but it's a super important product. If you're trying to integrate anything with Cisco WebEx room kits, you're going to run into certain challenges because it's kind of a siloed system. It really only wants to run WebEx. But as we know, WebEx is not the only player in the game, and there's plenty of people who don't use it at all. So whether you're actively selling Cisco systems or you just have some clients that already own them, this is a super important box to know about. So here's the application. We're turning your Cisco WebEx room kit into a general purpose agnostic conference peripheral. You just want to use the camera and the speakers and the microphone for Teams or Zoom or whatever. It's exactly what this box does. It gives you USB and HDMI connectivity from a walk-in laptop. They plug in their USB and all that stuff just responds like any other conference peripheral. This is officially supported by Cisco. In fact, Cisco loves this product because it makes their product work better. So again, I love this slide. Comply, right? TAA compliance is so important these days when you're trying to work in environments like, defense or government, and those happen to be the kind of places where you find those Cisco WebEx systems. Those tend to be the guys that use these in the first place. So having this be TAA compliant was absolutely necessary, and luckily it is. By the way, let's not overlook those Fortune 500s who are themselves highly secure, whether it's financials or somebody else. They struggle with this whole Cisco thing because they trusted Cisco for their network equipment, so it wasn't a stretch to go make a big investment with Cisco for their conference equipment. Well, 4 or 5 years ago, that might have seemed like a great idea, and then the prominence of Teams and Zoom kind of took over, and now I don't know if they're kicking themselves, but they're realizing nobody's using their gear. Where are all the people? I bought all this stuff. Why aren't you using it? Why are you just using your company-issued laptops to run conferences when you've got all this Cisco WebEx gear? Well, it's because we can't easily just show up and run Teams and Zoom on it. So CTOs love this because it solves that problem. You're actually tripling the value of your Cisco WebEx system by adding a 4KX Plus. How many products can you say that about? It actually makes your existing investment worth 3 times as much. Accommodating Zoom and Teams, of course, it's critical these days. You have to be able to do it. And people who are considering upgrading or replacing their Cisco room systems can now eke a few more years out of them probably by using a relatively inexpensive 4KX Plus. Let's talk about the INOGENI toggle. I said at the top, if you know INOGENI for anything, it's probably the Share 2U or the toggle is what I should have said, because the toggle numbers-wise is probably the single most popular INOGENI product out there. And for an obvious reason, toggle takes any 3 USB peripherals and switches them between 2 host devices. In this case, we've got an array of conference gear. We want to switch it between PC1 and PC2. This alleviates the pain of the guest laptop, because you've all done systems like this. We've got a perfect Zoom room. The PC is installed. It's running Zoom. We've got the camera, the mic, the speakers. Everything's perfect. Then some guy always shows up with a MacBook and wants to run Teams. Then what do? Now you got to switch cables. You got to extend things to the desktop, and it's very annoying. This takes that away completely. So when I show up with a laptop, I plug in my USB, it switches those devices to me automatically. I run the conference, and when I leave, it switches them all back. But you can also do that switch manually from an onboard button, contact closure, or an RS-232 command. So, obviously every conference room in the world needs a toggle. And that's the biggest place that you're going to see these, but certainly not the only place. Education spaces, streaming facilities, any place you've got multiple users, multiple computers, maybe dedicated computers that do different things, presentation spaces. I even found kind of an unorthodox application for it right here in my home studio. So I have 2 MacBook Pros that are kind of dedicated to different duties. One of them is running Resolume Arena, which I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's a live video triggering and processing platform. And my other MacBook Pro is running Ableton Live, which is a live triggering and processing audio application. So they kind of do the same thing, one for video and one for audio. But what's great about them is they all support these Akai APC40 Mark II control surfaces. So I've got 3 of those lined up in a row, and I used to have to switch the cables every time I went from video world to audio world. But today, I've got them all plugged into my toggle. I hit a button, and it takes about 3 seconds for all that stuff to just go from video world to audio world. And it's the greatest workflow enhancement I ever had over here at home. So again, there's a whole sub-market there in the production, post-production world that I think is kind of untapped and maybe something we should all be going after. This is a weird one, but I think you're going to like it. The UCam is so cool. It is a converter, again. And I'm going to kind of skip right to the diagram because this one might be a little bit harder to understand. We've been talking about all this conversion, but sometimes you really want to take a piece of conference gear and get it in the traditional video world. So this converts USB to HDMI. I'm going to say that again. This converts USB to HDMI. Well, that's pretty weird. Who would want to do that? Well, people want to do it all the time because there's lots of neat gear out there, but it's very hard to do anything with other than plug it into computers. So here's an example, and this is actually the example that kind of spawned this whole thing. Selling a lot of Hudley canvases. It's a whiteboard capture system. It's great, but it's USB only. So what if I want to take my Hudley canvas and maybe a Kramer conference puck? I want to take the video from one and the audio from the other and merge them together onto an HDMI stream that I can now do whatever I want with. I can plug it into a monitor, plug it into an extender, plug it into a matrix switch, whatever. That's exactly what this is. But remember, asterisk, the Hudley canvas still needs to talk to the USB bus because it takes commands from Teams and Zoom when you're using it. So we have a USB loop out on the UCam, so it can still be on the USB bus and still talk to the conference platform while it's being converted to HDMI. Everything happens at once. So it's a pretty important feature. Here's another application. Let's say you're trying to capture two whiteboards. You got one of those super wide whiteboards, let's say. No problem. I could show you how to do that in OBS or something, but that's not really viable in a commercial environment. So take two Hudley canvases, two UCams, convert those to HDMI, plug them into a Kramer VP440X, and stitch that image together using the Kramer. But remember, while it's in there, we're still running them out to the computer at the same time. Beautiful. That's what we actually wanted to do. We get asked all the time, does INOGENI support my extender? I'm using this extender or that extender. Is it going to work with my INOGENI stuff? Well, 90-something% of the time, the answer is yes. But wouldn't it be nice to just take the guesswork out of it completely and buy your USB extender from the same company you're buying your switcher from, or your toggle from, or whatever? And that's exactly what UBridge is. UBridge is a USB 2.0 extender, uses Cat 5e, Cat 6, or Cat 7, goes up to 330 feet. And this is fully tested by INOGENI and works with all their stuff and is a really nice format. You can see it's got lots of indicator lights on it, which is a good feature. Not everything has. So if it was me, I would want the confidence of buying this from the same place I got my USB switching gear, because you know how it is. If something doesn't work, you never want two manufacturers blaming each other. Just eliminate that, buy this from INOGENI, and move on with your life. Remember, they got lots of single channel boxes too. We've been talking about a lot of impressive switching technologies, and that stuff's great. But they've also got stuff like this. If you're just trying to convert HDMI to USB, of course we've got a box for that. And this is their flagship version of that technology. The 4KX USB 3 takes an HDMI input, gives you a loop out. It's got the USB conversion output, and it's even got that cool audio I/O, the same thing we saw in the Share 2U. So you can use that for capturing or outputting in an analog domain. There's another really neat feature here that might be a little weird, and I'll do the best I can to explain it in the time we have. But see the block on the bottom there? That's the Visca RS232 control. This is super cool. Remember, the whole reason we're using this converter is because our camera doesn't have USB. It's an HDMI camera. We got to convert it. Well, the thing that eliminates is UVC connectivity. Remember, in Teams or Zoom or whatever, the UVC features allow you to send PTZ commands over the USB bus and control the camera at the other end of that USB. Well, you can't do that if your camera doesn't have USB. So INOGENI built a converter into this product that takes those UVC camera commands and converts them to Visca over RS232 traditional 3-pin copper connectivity. So you can actually still use UVC to send PTZ commands to your camera, even though your camera doesn't even have USB. I don't know anybody else that has that feature. It's awesome. And it's certainly perfect to have it on this particular box. I love that. By the way, you'll notice this is Zoom certified. I almost forgot to mention that. If you need something more simple, just a single input, single output, there you go. 4K2 USB 3. Cool thing about this is it is 4K field upgradable. So you can buy this 1080p or 4K. But if you buy it 1080p and then decide you want 4K down the road, you can buy a field firmware upgrade and just make it 4K, which beats the heck out of throwing everything away and starting over. That can be expensive. And besides, some people may find that they never need 4K. So why pay for it? Just have the option out there. Come back to it if you decide you need it. SDI to USB 3 is the same concept. It's just got an SDI input with a loop output. That is 3G SDI, by the way. And a USB output. This is Zoom certified. We see this one in a lot of production and live event environments for the obvious reasons. That's typically where you're going to find SDI. Although I've seen plenty of people use these in general commercial environments too, just because it's cheaper and easier to pull SDI, and it's just so reliable that some people would just prefer to use that and use an SDI camera. No problem. This works either way. So INOGENI goes to great lengths to make sure their stuff is compliant with all the major players on the market. This is just a snapshot. They do have a curated list on their website if you ever want to go look. But certainly anything on here is going to work great. There's plenty of other options out there, certainly. These are just some of our favorites. We also want to mention, again, I mentioned it earlier, INOGENI products are all manufactured in Canada to the highest quality standards. They are TAA compliant. And when INOGENI says our products work with Teams, Zoom, QSys, some of the other guys that we mentioned there, they've gone to great lengths to make sure that that's 100% true. They're really serious about those manufacturer relationships, and they go to great lengths to get those things set up, and there's a lot of testing involved. So this is a company you can trust. We've had tremendously good luck with INOGENI, and I think most of you have too. And if you're, like I said, doing this for the first time, take the plunge, man. This is good stuff. We trust it.